No. Allow me to explain why. We're back again with another cold opening because everyone enjoyed the last one so much, talking about the 2019 action sci-fi thriller, The Gemini Man. It stars Will Smith as former Marine Scout sniper turned DIA assassin, Henry Brogan. It's not great, but notably has some decent action set pieces and fun gunplay that demonstrates some relatively modern combat marksmanship techniques, kit, and sniper tradecraft. The most notorious of which by far is the opening scene, which involves Henry engaging a target on an absolutely thrashing high-speed train.
Confirmed. Clear. Go to green.
Quite the feat of elite musketry indeed, but it's one I think is intuitively absurd to most viewers. And I know this has been discussed before on YouTube, but I'd like to explore why it's absurd on a technical level. Firstly, we'll need to analyze and collect as many of the variables and conditions shown in the film, and then input these into a ballistic solver to generate a firing solution. To do this, I'll be using Applied Ballistics Quantum. It's basically a supercalculator that focuses on predicting bullet trajectories. Critically, it has the Weapons Employment Zone, or WEZ feature, which provides a hit percentage simulation based on key variables input by the shooter. So first of all, step one is to input our gun data. The rifle is immediately obvious as a Remington, based on the iconic bolt handle and the stock. And checking the excellent resource that is IMFDB confirms it as a Remington 700 PSS. The PSS came in a variety of calibers, including .308 Winchester, .223, 7mm Remington, and .300 Winchester Magnum. With Henry being an old-school scout sniper from the Marines, I'd wager it's likely he favours .308. And if we go frame by frame through this shot of him loading the rifle, we can identify it as a .308 based on this visual match of the cartridge profile. You might also notice this black tip here on the projectile, which denotes this as an armor-piercing round. This small detail is a nice touch by the military advisors or the armorers from the film, and it also makes sense narrative-wise, noting that he's planning to shoot through a train window. But more detail on that later. Now, 7.62 black tip has been manufactured in different varieties from numerous different countries since the 1950s, but given Henry's position as a US government super-duper sniper spy-man guy, we'll speculate it's American M993 armor-piercing ammunition. Although M993 has been around since the 90s, and it is currently being phased out, it's still likely in service today and uses a nasty tungsten core penetrator compared to the steel core penetrators of older rounds like the M61. As I don't happen to have a Remington and 7.62mm armor-piercing ammunition laying around, we'll have to pull the technical data from the internet and plug in a bullet weight of 128 grains, length of 1.141 inches, and a ballistic coefficient of 0.419 G1. Next is the muzzle velocity. Now, the optimal method here is to fire your own rifle through a chronograph, but as I can't do this either, we'll use the manufacturer's specs of 910 meters per second or 2,985 feet per second. But this figure will change depending on the length of the barrel. A longer barrel will generally offer more velocity, while a shorter barrel will have less velocity. The industry standard for testing centerfire ammunition is conducted using a 24-inch barrel, and the Remington PSS that Henry is using comes standard as a 26-inch barrel, but his rifle appears to be cut down to about 20 inches. The rule of thumb here is that velocity decreases around 25 feet per second per inch of barrel loss. So let's subtract 100 FPS for the shorter barrel, but you'll also notice the suppressor as well, which can create a mild increase to muzzle velocity. With that being said, newer models such as the rugged suppressors Surge 762 being used here by Henry are marketed as creating negligible shift in point of impact when mounted. So we'll add a paltry 20 FPS back on for the suppressor, bringing the total muzzle velocity to 2,905 feet per second. For zero distance, I'm going to use 100 yards. Again, noting that Henry is an old school Marine Scout sniper. The rifle twist rate is 1 in 12, and we know the sight height is 1.26 inches, which we know from identifying these as the Trijicon standard height 34mm scope rings. Speaking of scope, next up comes the scope input info. Henry is using a Trijicon TARS 3-15 by 50 with quarter MOA adjustments. The TARS is unfortunately discontinued, but at the time came with two different reticle options. which the movie doesn't display, instead opting to show whatever this is, which is an odd detail considering how accurately they display the laser rangefinder reticle. Right, that's nothing too complicated so far. Let's get set up for the shot itself. To replicate the environmental conditions, we need to first know where this shot was taken. We broadly know it's the countryside outside Liège, Belgium, as the opening scene of the film shows the train departing this location. But this shot showing Henry's position is a bit more difficult to ID. I went insane on live stream trying to geolocate this exact position.
I'm losing my fucking mind.
And I'm no rainbolt, but this bridge should be easy. There's an obvious tunnel, distinct landscape, recognisable columns, and we know the rough location is somewhere in Belgium, or at least Western Europe. But try as I might, I simply could not get an accurate pin to this firing location.
What if I just do this? Look, you got the bridge there. Focus on the bridge.
And the most consistent result using Google Lens kept repeatedly pointing to the Körösegi Viaduct in Hungary, which, although looking similar in concept, has no tunnel, different architecture, is a motorway for cars as opposed to a train track, and is a 17-hour journey from Liège. It was about this point in the live stream that some of the channel members pointed out the possibility that this was a CGI scene, meaning that there was likely some digital tomfoolery afoot. So delving into the production of the film, I learned the digital effects were done by Weta Digital. That's right, the same team behind the effects of Lord of the Rings, King Kong, and Avatar, arguably some of the most visually spectacular films ever made. So rendering a fake tunnel, bridge, train, or even a whole landscape, particularly on a static shot like this, is probably light work for their talent pool. All this ultimately led me to conclude that this is a composite shot rendered in post-production. With that being said, I need some sort of real-world location in order to collect the field variables. So I'm going to settle for this small field overlooking the aforementioned Körösegi Viaduct, which is roughly the same relative position and orientation as Henry's spot in the film. Now that we've kind of got the location, we need a time frame. The movie's Hungary scenes were filmed in May 2018. So using this, we can do a bit of a weather background check and input our average temperature of 24.39 degrees, humidity of 53%, pressure of 997 HPA or 29 inches of mercury, and a latitude of 46 degrees north, which allows the computer to calculate the Coriolis effect, just like Captain Price did way back in Pripyat.
At this distance, you'll also have to take the Coriolis effect into account.
Next, we input our target information. Normally, the first variable we'd enter is the range, but let's circle back to this once we've set up the WES simulation, and instead do the azimuth or direction of fire, which is 180 degrees, given that Henry is facing due south, our inclination or angle of fire of 2 degrees, which is minimal, and Henry does appear to be aiming slightly downhill, but the terrain map is similar in elevation. Our target speed of 147 miles per hour, which we know thanks to Henry's in-film accomplice.
238 kilometers per hour and holding steady.
But I'll also circle back to the moving target a bit later. Wind speed 1 is going to be 10 kilometers per hour or 6 miles per hour, which is our average wind. And wind speed 2 will be 46 kilometers per hour or 28 miles per hour, which is our max gusting wind. We know the wind is coming from the right, as we can see the arrow direction on the turret as Henry makes his adjustments. And although it's hard to tell how many clicks he dials, we can safely infer it's a full value wind at target end by the way he's cranking the arse out of it, as the wind at his position is mild based on this grass. Ultimately, we know his wind call is accurate, as he both uses his Kestrel wind meter, and more importantly, he ends up putting metal onto meat, which is the ultimate validation of your wind call and your elevation data. Next, and most importantly, is the range. Henry's Vortex laser rangefinder shows this as 1,238 meters give or take, but that's to the near side of the bridge. And based on the thickness of these concrete walls, and also that the train is on the southern side of the track, we'll need to add some distance on top of this for depth and round this figure to 1,250 meters. The next step is to input the WES settings, which lets us customize the target for the purpose of the simulation. Henry's target is this man here, Valery Dormov. And while human head is not an option for target type, a circle is, which is fortunate, as old Valery here has a rather pronounced orange-shaped Carl Pilkington-esque head. And based on the average adult male head size, we can assume it's approximately 7 inches in diameter. The next WES settings are the confidence parameters. This stuff gets a bit complicated, but as long as you understand these inputs not as averages, but as standard deviations of each uncertainty. For example, if you were estimating a target distance by eyeball, you would expect a much higher degree of uncertainty, say 50 meters or even 100 meters, than if using a laser rangefinder, which can be as accurate as to within 1 meter if the conditions are just right. These settings plus the previously entered target are essentially what fuels the simulation. Under the bonnet, this is running complicated differential equations way above my pay grade and mental capacity, but in simple terms, the solver simulates thousands of different shots with slight changes to the uncertainty values to estimate how often the chosen target size will be hit under the specified field conditions at a specified distance. Still with me? Good, because here comes the interesting part. After putting in our distance, our WES analysis gives us a hit percentage of 8%. It's also important to note this 8% is using high confidence inputs, meaning that Henry would need to be correct within 10 feet per second for his muzzle velocity, 1 mile per hour for his wind call, and within 1 meter for his range estimation. If we change the confidence values to medium, which is more reflective of human capabilities, the hit percentage drops to a mere 1%. But Henry has Hollywood magic, so let's give him benefit of the doubt that he's using high confidence inputs and bring his hit percentage back to 8%. But here's the best part. Even with this generous 8% buff, this calculation is based on a stationary target, as the WES analysis doesn't simulate moving targets. And I could argue you'd call it myth busted based on that alone. It's not looking too good for the man of Gemini. But let's keep cracking this nut and talk about the moving target. We know the train is moving at 238 kilometers per hour or 147 miles per hour, which is also 65 meters per second. We'll need this later. And we also have a time of flight of 2.65 seconds, which isn't too far off what the film shows. There's a bunch of formulas and different ways to go about calculating moving targets, but Applied Ballistics has done the work for us, and using the input target speed of 147 miles per hour gives us a lead, or distance needed to aim in front of the target, of 17,432 centimeters, or 174 meters, which, like the time of flight, actually looks pretty close to what they show in the movie. This lead equates to 479 minutes of angle, or 1,919 quarter MOA clicks on Henry's Trigicon TARS scope, which problematically only has 120 MOA of built-in travel for the windage adjustment, meaning that Henry couldn't dial this lead onto his scope even if he wanted to. So to hit this moving target, Henry would need to aim at a predetermined reference point in the environment, which is ultimately what he's shown to do in the film after an innocent bystander causes a delay to his original engagement. But this does beg the question, how was he planning on getting the hit in the first place when he wasn't applying this bleed? But let's not talk about that. Anyway, moving on. First is his point of aim. For example, this vertical beam on the bridge we see him snap to just prior to releasing his shot. And secondly, a trigger point that the moving target crosses. And based on the correlation between the target speed and time of flight, the bullet connects exactly where you want it to. Easy, right? A couple of problems. Firstly, the accuracy of the reference points. Henry would need to have two visually obvious landmarks 174 meters apart. The odds of finding something fine enough like a pole or fence post at this exact interval is slim. And noting that his target is seated in the 6th carriage, second window from the rear, it's just not a very refined visual trigger. Henry would also not have sufficient field of view through the scope to see both points in the sight picture, which means he would be doing a Steve Buscemi impression trying to watch the crosshair placement while simultaneously tracking the approach of the train. The second and larger problem is a matter of timing. The average male reaction time is 0.25 seconds, and we know that the train is moving at 65 meters per second, meaning that the train has moved 16.25 meters in a time it takes for the average human to even process and action the visual stimulus of the target crossing the mark. And Henry is old, meaning his reactions are probably more like 0.5 seconds. But let's again give him Super Sniper Spy-Man benefit of the doubt and halve his reaction time to 0.12 seconds. But even then, the train has still moved a whopping 7.8 meters within the bracket of his physiological abilities. To really hammer the point home, let's also see how long his exact target, a human head, is on the aiming mark. Using the simplest of maps, first let's take the 7-inch diameter target, converted to 18 centimeters, and then convert our 65 meters per second to 6,500 centimeters per second. Then divide our 18 centimeter head by our 6,500 centimeters per second traveled, giving a time of 0.0027692 seconds, meaning Henry would need a reaction time of 2.8 thousandths of a second, and that even his Super Sniper Spyman reaction time of 12 hundredths of a second is still 43 times too slow to make this shot. Think of it like playing one of those time zone stacker machines, but one that only gives you 2.8 milliseconds to press the button, but your finger takes 120 milliseconds to move. In short, impossible. But I'm not done yet. Even if Henry pulls off the perfect 8th percentile shot, establishes millimeter correct reference points, and times the trigger press correct to 2.8 thousandths of a second, his bullet faces one final challenge before making pink mist of this human head. This pane of glass. Engaging through glass is its own dark art in the wizarding world of shooting. So I'm going to try and keep this simple to not offend the secretive glass goblins of the sniper community. Firstly, what can we learn about this window? As we know, the train departs from Liege in Belgium, and we can see Lex or Luxembourg Express with blue markings on the side of the train. I tried to visually match this just by eyeball, but this headlight arrangement was nowhere to be found on a real train. And after some Googling, determined that Lex is a fake train company using an equally fake CGI train, which would make sense when you have your camera this close to the edge of the platform. With that being said, the train looks like it was most likely inspired by the Siemens Velaro line, which ride both the Eurostar and Intercity Express, or ICE lines, which run from Liege to other European countries. I am probably tilting a lot of train enthusiasts right now, but I'll merrily concede I'm no train spotting connoisseur, so if you've got a better guess for the train, chuck it in the comments. A bit of Googling reveals the Velaro windows are most likely manufactured by this company, Saint-Gobain, I'm Australian, I don't know, Saint-Gobain Secura Transport, who list Siemens Automotives as a client on their website. The exact composition and specs are tightly controlled, but some of their flagship products include protective and thermally regulated glass technology. After learning more than I cared to ever know about automotive glass, it seems the train side windows likely use a multi-layer stack consisting of low E or low emission, double glazed panels with acoustic protection, a separate laminate layer, a gas-filled spacer gap, a thermal coating layer, and even a fine grid woven into the metal layer of the glass to help with mobile phone reception, bringing the total thickness to approximately 25 millimeters. For comparison's sake, the average car windshield, which is already quite tough, is only 5 millimeters of laminated glass. Having now assessed that Henry is up against 25mm of glass, we can now work some more simple maths. Thanks to AB, we know that at 1,250 meters, Henry's 7.62 round is hitting with 369 joules of energy and traveling 978 feet per second. We also know from manufacturer's specs that the M993 AP round can defeat 7mm of rolled homogeneous armor, or RHA, at 500 meters. RHA is pretty much hardened steel that used to be the go-to plating for military armored vehicles. And while RHA is old technology, it serves still as a common unit of measure for expressing the armor-penetrating capabilities of a given projectile. The most accurate way to go about this mathematically would be to determine what 7mm of RHA is equivalent to in terms of glass, and then also at double the distance. Alas, my mathematic learning journey stopped at high school, and I don't think feeding this problem to AI makes the most exhilarating viewing. So instead of algebra, let's draw some simple deductions for simple brains. So Henry's M993 round defeats 7mm of steel at 500 meters, but now he's shooting at 2.5 times that distance at 1,250 meters. So let's say that at that distance, it can therefore defeat roughly 3mm of steel. It wouldn't scale in a linear fashion like this. It would be likely much less, but for simplicity's sake, let's make this so. So the question here becomes, is 25mm of modern multi-layered glass stronger than 3mm of steel? Going off just vibes without complicated maths, my gut says yes. But let's also explore the velocity figures. At 1,250 meters, Henry's 7.62 round has bled off a lot of speed, and now traveling 978 feet per second or 298 meters per second has comfortably dropped below the speed of sound, and is now slower than the average muzzle velocity from a standard .22 caliber round. The so what here is that at such low speeds, the M993 round lacks the required velocity for the tungsten penetrating penetrator to effectively do its job. So the armor-piercing characteristics of the projectile are arguably redundant at this point. The energy at this distance is also a shade of its former self, and hitting with 369 joules is roughly equivalent to a 9mm round fired from a compact pistol. There's plenty of videos of 9mm shooting bulletproof glass and shooting car windshields, but I unfortunately couldn't find any examples with similar specs to the train window. So seeing as we're doing pretty much vibe ballistics at this point, what do you think? Could a standard 9mm pistol round not only defeat 25mm of composite glass, but then also retain sufficient energy to destroy a human melon on the other side? With this question uncertain, what I'd say with confidence is that penetration or otherwise, it would not be a repeatable outcome. One thing I do know about shooting through glass is that the results at target end are wildly inconsistent, as the projectile deforms from the impact and deviates unpredictably from its original trajectory. But to be fair to Henry, I'll give him an extremely generous 50% chance of defeating the glass, for the purpose of our calculations. Let us recap. Henry has an 8% chance of hitting his target if it was stationary. He has a 0% chance of hitting the target on the moving train, and a 50% chance of the bullet penetrating the window, which gives us a final result of 8 times 0 times 50 for a 0% probability of making this shot. Tactically speaking, of course.